My name is Carr Harkrader. I'm the director of the Interfaith Leadership Institute, and I get the distinct honor and privilege of introducing our two guests for our opening plenary at this year's ILI. And I'm not going to say that much because they are great, and I want to give them as much time as possible. So I'm going to get right to it. Our first guest is probably someone very familiar to almost all of you, and that is Eboo Patel. Eboo is the founder and president of Interfaith Youth Core. He founded IFYC on the idea that religion should be a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier of division. He is inspired to build this bridge by his identity as an American Muslim navigating a religiously diverse landscape that is America. Our second guest, I'm very, very excited to introduce, and that is Kelly Corrigan. Kelly is a writer, interviewer, and podcast host. She has 5 New York Times bestsellers, which is 5 more than I think I will ever have. She's the host of the upcoming PBS television show, Tell Me More, and she's the host of the podcast, Kelly Corrigan Wonders, where she's connected with such guests as Cecily Strong from SNL, if you're familiar, Austin Channing Brown, and Margaret Atwood. Her passion for connection and understanding motivates all her work, and we are so excited to have her here with us today. So with all that said, I want to get straight to the conversation. As a reminder, we're going to try to have a short amount of time for Q&A at the end of their conversation. If you do have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as possible, knowing that we won't get to all of them, so thank you for your patience on that. With all that being said, I am going to pass it over to our two great speakers, Eboo Patel and Kelly Corrigan.
Hey.
Unmute.
Oh my God. Did you see that it was like the statement of the year of 2021 was you're on mute?
Well, I mean, you just gave me the signal. You just like push the button. By the way, you have the distinction of having written 5 New York Times bestsellers. I have the distinction of writing 5 books whose entire readership is on this Zoom on this webinar with us. So thank you to the readership of my books on interfaith leadership. Welcome to Kelly Corrigan, friend, podcast host extraordinaire, leader of diverse democracy and pluralist civilization. I will get to why I'm calling you that in a minute. It actually has a very distinctive heritage, that line. John Courtney Murray, the great Jesuit philosopher, once said that the definition of civilization is living together and talking together. And the challenge of a diverse democracy, the reason that it really hasn't existed at any mass level before the attempt of diverse democracy of the United States of America, is precisely because it's so challenging to talk across difference. And you, Kelly, are going to help us do that. So how cool is that? And no pressure.
Cool. Yes.
This is really the premier gathering space and training ground for interfaith leaders. And it is made premier mostly, almost entirely, I would say, by the participants. They are remarkable college students and faculty and administrators and some community leaders and clergy who feel in their hearts and know in their souls and do with their actions what it means to build a religiously diverse democracy in this nation, which is, quite remarkably the most religiously diverse nation in human history and the most religiously devout country in the Western Hemisphere. I've recently been reading David French's book, Divided We Fall, and he reminds us that for all the sins and mistakes of, shall we say, the European founders of the late 18th century, part of what they managed to do was to bring together the combatants in the European wars of religion and encourage them to attempt to build something better together. A place where if we achieve our country, as Baldwin would say, all of us can thrive. But to do that, we're going to have to learn to live together and talk together. We're going to have to build bridges between diverse orientations around religions. Those bridges do not fall from the sky or rise from the ground. People like you show us how to build them.
And you.
And me.
And all y'all who are listening.
So, one of the things I wanted to say in the kind of opening is I enter the mansion of interfaith cooperation, if you will, as a committed Ismaili Muslim. I'm committed to the community and to the theology. I kind of read the world through that doctrine and theology. And there's lots of participants here who would say, I'm a committed Orthodox Jew. I'm a committed member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, committed Catholic, committed Sunni Muslim, committed Buddhist, committed Baha'i. And I'm here to learn more about people from other religious traditions, including agnostics and searchers and atheists. And I'm here to build bridges. And there's lots of other people who would say, I'm not particularly committed to a tradition, but I'm curious, I'm interested. And it occurs to me in our friendship, that describes you more than it describes me. And I'm, so speak to that a little bit, Kelly, like who are you?
Well, first, I do want to say, like, hats off to people who feel their belief deeply and are still have room in their hearts and their minds for the curiosity that it would take to want to participate in something like this. Because there's another story, like a version of a life story where you have found your truth and your interest in other people's versions of the world diminishes. So it's kind of a cool organization to even be a part of, for me, to be around people who have deeply held beliefs, but are also eager to know and understand other people. So I grew up Catholic. We went to Mass every Sunday. My parents went to church every single day, which created in me a terrific curiosity because I would be next to my parents. You go take communion and then you come back and you kneel. And both of my parents would cover their faces after they took communion and said their prayers. And I can't tell you how curious that made me. Like, what are they saying? What are they asking for? What are they saying thank you for? Like, what is going on in that relationship that's clearly so private? And also, I think I was very struck by the position they were in. Like, in my life at that time, they were the grand authority on all matters. But in church, somehow they became very small. And I just remember thinking that my dad looked kind of boyish, the way he would sing along and mess up all the words. And then what he looked like after he was praying, he just looked like a kid. And I think in that house, he was the kid. And then there was this other piece that increased my curiosity, which was that we would go to confession. And, you watch my parents would go face to face and they would sit down. So I could actually stare at them and like try to make out, try to lip read. Like, what are they saying to Father Pat? What do they have to confess? Like, it was such a strange mix of realities that you were this kind of grand authority figure was also seeking, asking forgiveness, looking for leadership and guidance. Like, that's not how I saw my parents in any other scenario. Then I went to college and I met tons of people from tons of other religions. And for me, what stuck was the curiosity. What did not stick was the Catholicism. And I'm not sort of anti anything. I mean, I'm anti-war and I'm anti-cruelty and I'm anti-otherism. But the great things that belief can lead to, I'm all for. And the question I wanted to ask, so I struck out on this little project with this podcast, which was to do 10 episodes with 10 different people from 10 different faiths about whatever they believe in most. And belief can be so beautiful. And that was for sure one takeaway. But the other takeaway, as you said at the top, is that it's very weird to talk about. And it's sort of a taboo subject. And I don't really believe in taboo subjects. I think that's a really big problem, that people don't tell each other how much money they make, that people don't tell each other how often they have sex in the context of their marriage. I think it's a really big problem that people don't feel comfortable talking about their deepest beliefs. Like, I think that where there are taboos, there can be terrible misunderstanding. And maybe that's where we are. And as you say, we have set out on this outrageous mission. This country is an outrageous mission. It is crazy what we're trying to do. Crazy. To make a place that's fair for all these different kinds of people with all these different agendas. That is crazy. And here we are doing it. And this is it. This is the work of it right here.
I mean, somebody tweet that, the outrageous mission that is this country. Right? The outrageous mission that is this country. I love
Nobody does this. I mean, I think of it often when I'm traveling. So I've been to Sweden and Japan, 2 countries that pop out immediately. And I look around and Sweden is just uncanny. Like, not only does everyone sort of seem like they're the same height, but they also, almost all of them are wearing navy and blue sweaters, either navy sweater with white stripes or white stripes with a navy background. They're all, like there's just striking sameness. And then we went to Japan and I thought, this is incredible. This is so much different than the project of America. Like, you walk around New York City and you're like, holy smokes. We have to set things up so that they could work for all these people. That's amazing. Yeah,
I mean, there was a line by a writer some years back. I'm thinking about it now because the Olympics are back on. The Chinese Olympic team looks Chinese. The Russian Olympic team looks Russian. The Swedish Olympic team looks Sweden. The American Olympic team looks like all of them. Right? It's unbelievable. It's
unbelievable.
And when you sit around and realize, you read a Yuval Noah Harari, for example, you think about like the vast expanse of human civilization, where for thousands and thousands of years we lived mostly with 100 people who were mostly like us, and that was how we. And then you think to yourself, well, now actually you need to feel concerned for 330 million people, most of whom 99.99% you'll never meet, and 90% of whom are very different than you. And you have to, right? And so the attempt at it is just, it's remarkable, right? And I think, one of the people I think of as the guiding lights of this, Vincent Harding, he has this beautiful line, hero of the civil rights, wrote King's speech on the Vietnam War that he gave at Union Seminary in 1967, the year before he died, was martyred. Vincent Harding would say, I live in a nation that does not yet exist, right?
Right.
The outrageous mission of America. And so there's this like recognition that we're not there, but there's this hopefulness, right? I just listened to Nicole Hannah-Jones on the Ezra Klein show, and she talks about she's gotten all of this guff for the 1619 Project. And here she is saying, the majestic ideals of this nation are worth achieving, right? And so that is a huge part of what we are participants and leaders in the outrageous mission of achieving the majestic ideals of America. How about that, Kelly? You and
achieving
I are just
and sustaining. I know, but it's achieving and sustaining like that. I think that to start with that position, that mindset, that we're trying to create something that's never been created before, is both kind of inspiring and also puts the responsibility on us, which is where it should be. Like it's not like out there, they have to make this thing work. It's like each one of us has to carry the baton while we're here living in this country. And then we have to keep passing it, because it'll have to be, even if we get there, it'll have to be protected like mightily.
Yeah.
Because there'll always be forces that want it to be different.
So let's talk a little bit more about being the kind of people who don't expect bridges to fall from the sky or rise from the ground, but the architects of those bridges. So, I mean, I love the title of the podcast. Why keep it a secret, right? And I mean, it's not this kind of negative thing of like, don't talk about religion or politics. It's this sense of it's too good, it's too interesting to not talk about. So tell me how that title emerges for you.
Well, it's interesting because it's both a challenge to the talker and a challenge to the listener. which is to say, it can be just as scary to ask somebody about their beliefs as it is to represent your beliefs with words to someone who doesn't know them. Like, I think there's an honest, sincere, kind of very understandable desire not to say it wrong, because once you feel like you're representing.
We got Kelly mid-quote. Kelly, come back to us. Come back to us. There you go.
All right. So this, like, the idea that if you ask somebody about their religion, one reason they might not be comfortable is because they think that you're not going to celebrate it with them, that you're not going to believe it, that you're going to think they're like a fool. But another reason is because you have to be able to articulate specifically in a way that would hold up to some level of scrutiny what your religion is and what your religion makes you do. And so to me, any conversation where you're slightly off balance in that way is the road to intimacy. So to me, it's like, if you want to get to know people, if you want to know the people in your family and your inner circle better, if you want to know your roommate better, if you want to know the people that you're working with on student government better, or your lacrosse team better, this is where you go. Like, this is the white hot center of each of us. And even if our belief doesn't fall into a faith system, like a known faith system with a name and a flag and a mantra, people have beliefs. I mean, science is a belief system. I mean, some of it's very provable, but some of it is a belief. I remember I had cancer when I was in my 30s, and I remember that within that first couple of weeks after I had been diagnosed, I instantly discovered what everyone in my town believed. This person believed in like organic fruits and vegetables. This person believed in like second opinions and the best doctor, and like go to Stanford. So they believed in brands and the best medicine. This person believed in going to church and they were praying for me. This person believed that you should meditate and do yoga. Like, so it all comes to the fore when our lives are threatened. And therefore, I feel like there's no clearer indicator that this is the most deeply centered part of each of us. And so if you want to know somebody, then why not go right to the white hot center?
I mean, that is so many things to say about that. Number one, I'm glad you are healed. I once heard the great evangelical preacher Tony Campolo talk about his belief in science and God. And he's like, science can cure you, but God can heal you. And I thought that was so beautiful, right? That was so, and part of what I now feel like I know a lot more about your genius, because part of what you're doing in this podcast series is you're basically saying, how do I get to know your belief without having cancer? Okay.
That's
so
right.
I don't want to have cancer again. So how do I get to know and in order to do that, I need to have the right questions and the right affect. It is my job to make you feel comfortable talking about what the society thinks is a secret. So tell us a little bit about like the magic beans, if you will, right? What are the questions, but also give us just a little insight into like, how do you figure out how to ask them in a way that makes people feel comfortable? Right? The whole Maya Angelou thing of people will always remember how you made them feel. There's ways to ask questions. There's ways to ask the same question, right, to make people feel safe and to make people feel dumb.
Yes.
So what are the couple questions?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how do you make people feel comfortable?
Smile when you talk, like you can hear it in your voice. So a podcast is funny because you come to understand like the power of a human voice. And I think that's why there are 2.2 million podcasts and people love listening to them. It's because there is something really intimate about having someone in your ear. And I find when I'm doing the introduction reads and recording them, that if I talk like this, it sounds one way. And if I'm smiling when I talk, it sounds like this. And so I've carried that over into when I'm asking these questions, same words, different intonation changes everything. And then the questions that we settled on, I mean, we started with probably 20 and whittled it down. One that I felt like was really important is this pairing of What do you see that gives you faith? And what tests your beliefs? Because I think that a part of the tension around talking about belief is the sense that may or may not be true that you're supposed to like buy into the whole thing. Like if you're going to say you're Catholic or you're a Muslim, then you better be into every bit of it, or else it's going to be like a gotcha thing where I'm going to be like, well, what about this, Eboo? And what about this, Kelly? And there's always that. There's always holes in the thesis, you know, like that. It's a big enough, juicy enough topic that there's no way that you're going to have this kind of airtight case where there's not one bit of it that is hard for you, is curious making for you, it challenges you. And so I think even just having that question in the set of what tests your beliefs, what's hard for you to believe, can give people the space to have a belief that's evolving and that's maybe at some level considered incomplete.
Well, you know, if I mean, I love that you're saying that, and in a minute we'll get to a couple of these interviews and these clips, which I just loved. But you know, when I was committing more seriously to my own faith tradition in my early 20s to being an Ismaili Muslim, I was raised in it, and then I was what you might call an apatheist for a few years, and then I became curious and interested in religion. And like lots of people made me feel stupid for that. Somebody was like, man, you were cool in high school. Why'd you join the Flat Earth Society? By the way, I was never cool in high school. And being interested in religion is not the Flat Earth Society.
Wrong on both counts.
Right, exactly. But this, you know, I love Wilford Cantwell Smith, the great scholar of comparative religions. His use of the term faith. He says it's the relationship between the adherent and the tradition. And what he's suggesting is that, you know, Islam is 1,400 years old. It is in over 100 countries. It's 1.5 billion people right now. There's no way that any individual is going to embody all of it. You're going to emphasize some of it, right? And Hinduism actually, Hinduism has language for this. And I remember how liberating it was when I read this. There's this kind of a category system in Hinduism. There's the Jnana Yoga, there's the Bhakti Yoga, and there's the Karma Yoga. The Jnana Yoga is the path of knowledge. The Bhakti Yoga is the path of worship. The Karma Yoga is the path of action. And I thought to myself, wow, like that is so helpful to me. Which part of Islam do I emphasize? Now, that doesn't mean you don't do the rituals, right? There's some things that are important in kind of a cross-board way, but all of us resonate with some parts of the tradition in ways that we kind of embody and express and emphasize a little less the other parts. So,
asking that question is saying, I don't expect you to embody it all. I'm not coming like this. Like, well, it's what about? I'm coming like, what works for you? Where is it helpful and unhelpful? My friend Tracy Tuttle, my college roommate, just started being a therapist. And I said, what have you learned so far? And she said, the only thing that I ever ask is it helpful or unhelpful? I don't ask if it's right or wrong, and I don't ask if it's good or bad. I was like, that's pretty interesting. Because you just used the word helpful.
It's again, when I kind of first became more serious about being a Muslim and an Ismaili Muslim, I had this fear of like the old men with regulation-sized beards in my head who would scold me. And I know like dozens of them now, and there's lots of reasons I should be scolded, but they've never scolded me, right? They're interested in what I'm doing at IFYC. They recognize it's part of my Islamic commitment. Their path as an imam or as a scholar of Islam is different than mine. They expect certain things from me that are consistent, but they recognize that there is a distinctiveness in this way of emphasize. So there are things that we fear that might not actually be true. The authorities might not scold you, right?
That's right. And neither might your roommate. Like, because you're modeling, when you ask the question, you're allowing them to ask the question back.
So let's get into some of those questions and answers. And let's begin with actually a mutual friend of ours, the wonderful Asma Uddin. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Asma? We'll put her image up and then listen to some of her voice.
Great. So she is a religious liberties attorney. She's also deeply religious. She's a Muslim. She loved her dad, who was a big voice in the Muslim community in Miami. He got people, the whole town, to make space for prayer. A total pioneer. He memorized the Quran as a young guy. But her interest is so multifaceted because she's an attorney. And so she's coming in on the same line that we started on, which is, this is a very complex challenge we've given ourselves as Americans to make a space where there's room for everyone and all these beliefs. And so what she's trying to help do is protect the right to worship for all groups, not just Muslims. And she's so smart. And then also she's so deeply faithful.
So let's listen to that clip.
God tells us that he'll never test you with more than you can handle. As I've been in those moments where I'm being tested, I stay cognizant of that this is intentionally hard. Like, this is meant to be hard, but it's also not meant to be too hard for me. In the Quran, God is pretty clear that humans are created for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to worship God. Of course, he also says that our acts of good, our acts of kindness toward each other, those are all things that constitute worship of God. The reason we're here is to be our best selves and to serve humanity.
You know, the interesting thing that she started to get at, which is one of my also favorite questions, is what do your beliefs make you do? Because there is, you know, what I watched my parents do as Catholics was go to church, do the Stations of the Cross, go to confession, practice Lent, like some sacrifice during those days leading up to Easter. And then also donate time and goods and write checks and pray, so much praying. Like, I once asked my mom how many times a day she prayed, and she said, oh, I don't know, Kelly, 30. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad I asked that question. I had no idea. She said, I would pray all day long. So I think the idea of letting some set of beliefs drive your behaviors sounds like it might only apply to some people, but of course, our beliefs, whatever they are, whether they have a name or not, are animating all of us, are driving all of our to-do lists and all of our budgets. And I like the idea of thinking of a budget as a moral document and also a to-do list as a moral document. Like, you're only, I mean, I've thought about this in other ways, like, you're only a writer if you write every day. And maybe you're only a true believer in some set of traditions if you engage with them somehow, if they're affecting your moves during the day, like in a really CBT kind of way. Like, how do you talk to people? How is it different because of your faith? How, when there's a room to be cleaned up, are you the first one out the door or the last one to leave? You know, like those tiny things. When the person gets on a bus, do you stand up? Like, what is it making you do? And for her, for Usma, it's driving her entire career. I mean, she is a completely integrated person. All of her beliefs and her entire professional life are connected.
Yeah, I mean, I love, you know, there's whatever like Twitter fingers we have flying right now. Somebody's tweeting, or ought to be, a to-do list is a moral document, right? And what do your beliefs make you do? You know, I want to comment on that for a moment and say, I think the reason I first got interested in religion after several years, like I said, kind of away from it, is because as kind of a hair on fire social justice activist in my college years and early 20s, and as somebody who at the time was driven by anger and didn't really like myself because of it. Forget how other people must have felt about me. Like my roommate would like literally spend weeks away from our room because he just couldn't take my kind of fire breathingness. I started to realize that the people I admired the most in social justice activism and the people in some ways who were the most radical were almost always people of faith. And they loved people more than they hated the quote unquote system. And I started to like just ask about that. I was nervous asking. And the answer was always, oh, God, right? And USMA kind of, that's why I do this. I do this because helping people is part of worshiping God. And USMA says that in that little clip. And it's just, in Islam, in many religions, this notion that God makes you, puts you on earth. In Islam, it's called being the Abd and Khalifa of God, being his servant and representative. And you are meant to worship God. And the way you treat other people is a part of that worship. And the simplicity with which these people in the Catholic worker movement, et cetera, who would like do radical things, like give up their possessions to live with people in poverty. And it was like no big thing to them. It was like, eating a burger and fries for dinner. I'm like, why do you do this? And they're like, oh God, like, it's just that simple, Well,
I think like from a philosophical perspective, and happiness, which is like on the tip of everyone's tongues these days, there is this idea about integration. And when the parts of you, your behaviors, your finances, what you do on Sundays, who you fraternize with, whether you do or don't volunteer, if that's all discordant, like it makes for an uncomfortable being. And to the extent that that can get integrated, that everything is informed by this sort of core values, that's really helpful in terms of feeling productive and being a contributor, but also feeling happy, feeling satisfied, feeling organized as a being.
Yeah, whole, right? Whole.
Exactly.
Feeling, in addition to people, I think writing down these just like beautiful nuggets of wisdom, a to-do list is a moral document, right? I think they're also trying to write down the questions that you've developed that kind of unlocked this intimacy and beautiful conversation. I just want to say to everybody, part of what Kelly and her team have done is distill those questions down, and we're going to be sharing them with everybody because our hope is that you are the Kelly Corrigan of your residence hall or of your campus, and you're kind of cultivating these conversations. You are cultivating a pluralist civilization on your campus by helping, by asking the kinds of questions and creating the kinds of space where people can have open and beautiful conversations about religious identity and diversity. So you don't have to write down the questions because we will be sharing them with you.
Yeah.
And with that, let's get to the second clip on our little secret chat board here. We are being told this is interesting, but you need to move along. So let's get to the second clip. Tell us about the person we're going to be listening to right now.
I think it's Rainn Wilson. Is it Rainn Wilson?
No, it's the other interlocutor. It is Anthony Ray Hinton.
Oh my God. I cried so hard when we were recording this. I'll start there. So Anthony Ray Hinton was tried and convicted for murdering 2 white people in Alabama. He did 30 years in solitary confinement on death row, 7 feet by 9 foot cell. And he got out because Brian Stevenson, the great civil rights attorney, the Just Mercy guy, took his case. And it took years. Even after he took his case, it took years and years and years and years. This is a person that has so full of hatred, and somehow he's not. So the story of this podcast is how on earth Anthony Ray Hinton could be a force for good in the world after what's happened to him.
I was so angry with God. I couldn't understand how you allowed me to be convicted of a horrific crime that he knew that I didn't commit? Where was the God that my mom taught me had all powers, see all and know all? Where was God when I felt that I needed him the most? I felt that he abandoned me and he left me. And for 3 years, I didn't read my Bible. I didn't mention God's name. And then one morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, going into the 4th year of me being on death row, I woke up to the sound of a grown man crying. And a man that I had lived by for 3 years and never asked him his name, never spoke to him. But when I heard this man crying, the compassion that lived in me that my mother had taught me made me get up out of that bed, and I asked that man, was there anything I could do? And when he told me that he had got word that his mother had passed, I told him that I was sorry. And then I sat back on the bunk bed and I realized at that moment that I was still alive, and more important, my mother was alive. And I began to go back to what I truly loved and truly believed in. And I thank God for giving me a mother who was still alive. And at that moment, I connected back with my belief. I got on my knees and I asked God for forgiveness. Forgive me for being angry at you. And I truly believe with every fiber in my being that God was trying his best to tell me at that moment when I first went to death row, everything was going to be all right, but I was angry with him. I wouldn't listen.
You know, the idea of transcendent belief in the face of extreme suffering at a personal level or societal level is really worth our attention. Just really worth looking for those stories and examples and studying them and internalizing them. And the move, the interpersonal move that always sets people free is to focus on someone else. And that's what he did.
So, I mean, we're going to spend 2 or 3 minutes on maybe a very intimate conversation here, right?
Incredible.
Because in some ways, you are trying to make sense of him in your framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
we all are.
Right. The only place in my framework that can make sense of that dramatic of a move is in Islam. And here's what I mean by that, right? It's not rational. It is not rational to be in a 7 by 9 foot cell, convicted of a crime you didn't commit, and think to yourself, I am grateful that my mother is alive, and I am sorry that I've been angry at God for putting me in this position. Right? Mm-hmm. The only way that makes sense is for me is in a transcendent system. And every night in my house we do our Ismaili Muslim prayers and we read a verse of the Quran. And my kids are so wonderful and smart. They're 14 and 11. They will often tell me, and then we do a Quran discussion, right, for 5 or 8 minutes. They'll tell me what they think of the Quran verse. And sometimes I will tell them, it might be that God is trying to teach you things you don't know, you can't make sense of, right? We just had Eid, which is the Eid that comes after Hajj, which is the Eid that commemorates Abraham's willing to sacrifice in Islam. It's Ishmael in Judaism and Christianity is Isaac. And it's it's a story that doesn't make sense in any human level, ethical or rational framework. And when I share that story with my sons, and my wife is like nervous about me sharing it, but you can't not share it, right? My question is, what is God trying to teach us that is beyond our rational or ethical framework? Mm-hmm. Right? And I think there is a wisdom. Now, other people are smarter than me. They might have frameworks within their rationality or within their human level ethics that can make sense of that. You just did. For me, the only way I can make sense of Anthony Ray Hinton is within an Islamic framework. So
may we both stay humble in our attempts to deconstruct something that is that magnificent. I mean, that is a humbling challenge. Who could do that? Who would we be? Who would I be? I said to him, like, every person in Congress eat 3, right? I mean, so yeah, I think that there's a call to humility that scenarios like Anthony Ray Hinton's asks us to answer, which is like, do your best to make sense of this. And is it helpful? How you're making sense of this helpful? Then by all means.
You know, in some ways, this was like a little embodiment of an interfaith conversation, right? Like, how do people with two different frameworks understand a remarkable situation, and how do you learn from each other's frameworks, and what are principles that might underlie it, right? And humility is a principle that may underlie it. So let's go to our friend Wayne Wilson.
One more thing, after raising kids, I'm about to become an empty nester. There's a thing that happens in these kinds of conversations where you're going to put something in my ear, and I don't know how long until it goes through the machinery in there and comes out my mouth. Might be 3 years. Like, I'm seeing Georgia, my 20-year-old, say things that I said to her 7 years ago. And so we are, even though it's not evident that we are affecting each other immediately, it's in there.
Yep.
Do you want to do the third and final?
Let's do the third and final.
So, Rainn Wilson, because you're all Office fans, as you well should be, and he's Dwight Schrute, but he's also a Baha'i, which is a religion that I knew almost nothing about. And so it was a really fun conversation because it was all upside for me. I just learned 1,000 things. So listen to his clip and then we'll talk a little bit.
We don't know exactly why we need compassion, kindness, humility, honesty in this world. But those spiritual virtues, those are what we take with us. We're on an eternal journey to meet the unknowable creator. It's like we're a baby in the womb. We're preparing our arms and legs and elbows and eyebrows that we need for this physical world. In this physical world, we're preparing our spiritual arms and legs that we will need in the next world.
He's super, it's such a great episode and everyone will love it because he's so smart and articulate about his beliefs, and he's so open about what his beliefs make him do. So he's really active in Haiti. He tithes, so he gives a tremendous amount of his income away. And he talks about the struggle that can feel like. He talks about what happens when we die and why we're here and what traditions mean the most to him. So yeah, I think everyone will love listening to him. We loved that episode.
Yeah, it's I'll just say one quick word on this, and then see if there's maybe one or two questions. We're kind of pushing the time limit here, but there's all of these like evolutionary scientists and social psychologists are they're trying to frame compassion, etc., as rational, right? And as why aren't we just competitive creatures? Why aren't we just conflicting creatures, et cetera, et cetera? I believe that. Like, I believe it's good for getting along in groups, and there's pro-social reasons to do it, and it helps in evolution. And we are compassionate because God made us compassionate, right? God gives us his breath. This is an Islamic belief. God gives us taqwa, our inner torch, or a sense of conscience, and says being compassionate is part of worshiping me, right? And I love how Rain says we don't know why we're like this. I mean, the evolutionary scientists can tell us whatever they want to. there's a part of that that is likely true. And there are people who are compassionate even when it is not in their rational best interests. Why?
Right.
Right.
That goes to one of my favorite, deepest beliefs, which is and, not or.
Maybe take us out. Maybe take us out with this. We're this is give us your and, not or kind of belief, and we will leave people with this kind of pearl of wisdom.
So, my friend Andy he's very active. And so when we make plans with him, I say, like, do you want to go to the beach or watch the football game? And he'll say, and, not or, Kelly. We're going to go to the beach, then we're going to watch the second half of the football game. But I find that it has applications daily. So I put a thing on my Facebook page when shortly after Trump was elected and said, tell me, and, not or, like, in what ways are you a little bit liberal and a little bit conservative? And oh my God, I have never had more responses to a Facebook post in 15 years. And people were so set free to say, I am a military mother and I'm very proud of my kid. And I think we spend too much on the military. I am pro-choice, but personally pro-life. I am a teacher who feels that the federal government should not be involved in state education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that allowing space for people to wrestle with all the elements of their belief systems and not enjoy catching them in what seems like a contradiction, and basing that ability in your own humble realization that you too are engage in Hippocratic beliefs and conflicting ideas all the time would lead to incredible conversations. Incredible. Once both people agree that you might say some things that you might contradict yourself sometimes, and so might I, you could really talk in a way that people might change their thoughts. And that's the point of talking, is not to nail it, it's to evolve.
I love it. We will be passing along Kelly's secrets, her secrets, secret 10 questions that will help unlock other people's secrets. And the way I think about what you just shared, Kelly, is how do you ask the question? How do you create the space to build a trusting connection? And that is what it means to be a leader in the outrageous mission of the diverse democracy we call the United States of America. Friends, Romans, country people, Kelly Corrigan, thank you for being with us.